Displaced families in Tripoli languish as heavy fighting in Libya continues. New protests on the continent dislodge longtime leaders. But with regime change comes uncertainty. And Melinda Gates, co-founder of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, discusses her advocacy for access to contraceptives and family planning for women in sub-Saharan Africa. She also talks about the importance of being vaccinated. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. The heavy fighting in Libya, pitting the Western-backed government in Tripoli against a renegade Libyan general, is displacing tens of thousands of people who are now flooding the Libyan capital. With their limited resources, local aid workers say they do not have the capacity to take care of these families if the war expands. Soldiers in the capital are now warning that standoff could be quite lengthy. VOA's Heather Maddock reports from Tripoli.
For almost a month now, there has been almost constant fighting in the suburbs surrounding the Libyan capital. And soldiers say neither side is advancing. The fighting began in early April when renegade General Khalifa Haftar, the de facto leader in eastern Libya, ordered his troops to take over Tripoli. Since then, 42,000 people have been displaced, and UNICEF warns that more than 500,000 children are at risk if the battle continues.
Sometimes I am so scared I cannot talk or do anything. My little brother also sometimes can't talk. My mom tries to explain to him, but he is very scared.
Many families are hiding in their homes, afraid to leave. And as the battle drags on, aid workers say resources are growing thin.
We are very afraid of a large displacement of people because we have low capacities. We are dependent on the people and business people of Tripoli to help the families, so we fear we will not get enough support.
Before this fight began, many Libyan leaders had high hopes for peace talks that were scheduled in April. But these were canceled because of Haftar's attack on Tripoli.
The Western region was so close to becoming calm, peaceful, and secure before the war began. This war will bring destruction and instability, and it is very difficult to bring it to an end.
Tripoli has seen several wars since 2011, when a mass uprising overthrew another strongman, Muammar Gaddafi. Soldiers and analysts say the only way to end this conflict is negotiations. There is no military solution. Heather Murdoch, VOA News, Tripoli.
Africa has seen a wave of protests that has led to regime change in 3 countries now: Sudan, Algeria, and Zimbabwe. As VOA's Mariama Diallo reports, activists are now watching to see if the changes they were hoping for will actually take place.
Months of demonstrations helped Sudanese people end the 30-year rule of President Omar al-Bashir. Sudanese activists want to see major change in governance, says analyst Raymond Gilpin.
They want institutions that serve all the people. So over the short term, they have replaced an individual. They've gotten rid of al-Bashir, but the wheels of institutional change are grinding a little bit more slowly.
Large protests in Algeria also helped push former Algerian leader Abdelaziz Bouteflika.
Algeria, as you know, started with the price hikes, and then we had the issue of the 5th term for Bouteflika, and people had had enough.
Bouteflika has been replaced by the head of the upper house of parliament until a presidential election in July. Algeria's army chief, who was instrumental in Bouteflika's downfall, says the military will watch over the transition.
In Algeria, like in most countries, kind of use security and the military interchangeably. And the security that matters to most of the citizens is not what the military can provide. It's what the police provide: law and order, and the absence of civil unrest.
In Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe was replaced after 37 years, but governance changed very little. Soaring inflation, fuel costs, and shortages of basic foods sparked months of protests that escalated into riots.
The fact that we've had such explosive and costly, in terms of lives and property, riots and unrest in Zimbabwe speaks to the fact that that state-society relationship is still fractured.
In Uganda, people protested against a constitutional amendment that allows President Yoweri Museveni to run for another term. Opponents accuse Museveni of using security crackdowns to hold on to power. At a recent talk in Washington, activist Scovia Arinetwe recalls being thrown in jail shortly after major surgery.
And I was in police custody for 5 days. No medical attention. No being produced in court.
While protesters keep pushing for change, the full impact of their fight remains unclear in Uganda and elsewhere in Africa. Mariama Diallo, VOA News, Washington.
The U.S. Senate Human Rights Caucus on Wednesday organized a commemorative event for the 25th anniversary of the Rwandan genocide. It focused on preserving memories and preventing another such catastrophic massacre. VOA's Edward Rema attended the event and has our report.
Rwandans will do all it takes.
As Rwanda continues to commemorate 25 years since the beginning of 100 days of genocide that claimed close to 1 million victims, U.S. lawmakers, genocide scholars and survivors gathered at the United States Senate to reflect and discuss on how to preserve memory and prioritize prevention of future genocide. This happens as Rwanda continues to find ways to deal with the consequences of the genocide. Survivors like Immaculée Ilibagiza, who hid in a tiny bathroom for more than 90 days, are thankful now that they are able to see Rwanda that is free of ethnic divisions and hatred.
A lot have changed during these past 25 years. In the beginning, it was hard to live. It was hard to imagine about tomorrow, because it's like learning to walk completely anew. When you just lost your mom, your dad, your brothers, your grandma, your grandpa, uncles, aunt, it was like the whole world was over. 98% of my whole family, were killed. The youngest member of my family that was killed was 8 months.
Speaking at this event, Rwanda's Minister of Justice Johnston Busingye hailed the United States government for having arrested, prosecuted, extradited or deported genocide fugitives found on their territories. But he said there are still many more who are at large.
After the genocide, many people found themselves in all sorts of places, including the United States, in Canada, in Europe and other places. So what we want to continue to do are two things. One, continue to be active and look out all people suspected of having a role in the genocide and either extradite or try them or deport them, but make sure they have their day in justice. The second thing is denial. Denial is the last and most lethal phase of a genocide. Nobody wants to be associated with the genocide who committed it, who had a role in it. So everybody wants to deny. Everybody who had a role in genocide wants to deny. And denial simply takes away not just the genocide, but the memory of those we lost. And we risk a repeat of the genocide if denial is allowed.
Senator Chris Coons, whose office helped put together this event, said that what happened in Rwanda in 1994 should serve as a reminder on the need to preserve the memory of the genocide and learn from it as the world continues to see atrocities perpetrated against innocent civilians.
We have important lessons to learn. We have not yet fully learned the lessons of how to predict, to prevent, and to heal from genocide. Here in the United States, we have demonstrable evidence of the terrible legacy of our own history of racial oppression, of our own civil war, and of our own internal ethnic divisions. In other places I've been in the world, there are similar challenges. Obviously, horrors like the Shoah, the Holocaust in Europe, continue to happen. 25 years ago in Rwanda against the Tutsi, and currently against the Rohingya in Burma.
The 100 Days of Genocide began on April 7, 1994 and continued through July 1994. Edward Rema, VOA News, Washington.
Uganda's media regulator ordered the suspension of journalists at 13 local television and radio stations accused of airing sensationalized programming. The Uganda Communications Commission is calling for the suspension of the producers and heads of programming and news from outlets including media groups NTV, NBS TV, and Capital FM. This comes just days after the widely covered arrest of a pop star and opposition figure, Robert Chagulanyi, popularly known as Bobby Wine, who plans to challenge President Yoweri Museveni. In a statement released Wednesday, UCC spokesman Ibrahim Abossa said by phone that coverage of the firebrand politician's arrest was among the authorities' reasons for their action. However, it did not specify how long the move is likely to last. Uganda Journalists Union President Lucy Anyango Ikadu says the UCC directive should be condemned in the strongest terms possible and with all the contempt it deserves. Now, French police fired tear gas on thousands of demonstrators in Paris who marched through the streets of the French capital Wednesday to commemorate May Day. The protesters included both the anti-government yellow vest demonstrators and black-clad self-described anarchist groups that have caused violence at May Day protests in years past. More than 7,000 police were deployed to deal with any possible violence. Hundreds of businesses were closed ahead of time after a number of storefronts were vandalized during last year's May Day celebrations. Paris has been racked by the yellow vest demonstrations that have been held weekly since last September, which have often turned violent. Marches were also held in other French cities across Europe and in the United States. In New York, hundreds gathered in front of a building owned by and bearing the name of U.S. President Donald Trump on Wall Street and in Columbus Circle to protest a range of issues. Now, the first day of May, or May Day, is also known as International Workers' Day, an event popularized by the international labor movement to call for better working conditions. It is traditionally a day for political demonstrations. Well, Cameroon was once the 12th largest coffee producer in the world, but it has since slipped to 31st. The nation's production has plummeted from 156,000 tons in 1990 to barely 25,000 tons today. While exports still dominate, Cameroon is looking to domestic coffee consumption to help boost production. Moki Edwin Kinteka reports from the annual coffee festival in Yaoundé.
Cameroon's coffee drinkers sample locally made Robusta and Arabica coffees at a tasting village set up in the capital.
Tasting coffee today can make me want to drink more in the future. I think the coffee is very good.
The annual coffee event, Festi Coffee, aims to encourage Cameroon's 24 million people to drink more of the bean to help boost production.
The increase in coffee consumption will make Cameroon produce more. We can produce more if we can convince this large domestic market and get set to satisfy them.
Cameroon was once one of the world's largest coffee producers, but production dropped from a historic high of 156,000 tons in 1990 to barely 25,000 today. Industry insiders blame a drop in coffee prices by more than half for discouraging coffee farming.
We have to look for local solutions to our problems. Local consumption of coffee should be a part of our habits. I do not know why people have the tendency of behaving as if they're afraid of the coffee their country produces.
Cameroon, Africa's 7th largest coffee producer, is also looking outside the main export markets in Europe to regional ones.
Au niveau de la production, donc, nous, on va exporter à peu près 90%.
We shall be targeting neighboring markets in Nigeria, Gabon, Congo, and Chad. The markets are promising and can purchase about 90% of our coffee.
Nos pays frontaliers, le Nigeria, le Gabon, le Congo, le Tchad, voilà, tout ça,
The Cameroon market, for now, is consuming just 10% of what we produce.
Cameroon authorities hope to change that by urging their 300,000 government workers to drink more coffee. The theme of this year's Festive Coffee, Let's Act in Favor of Cameroon Coffee. Moki Edwin Kinzeka for VOA News, Yaoundé.
Well, more coffee. Now we want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook. So check us out and share our show with your friends. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince McCory. Still ahead on Africa 54. Giving back on a global scale. But first, a look at Thursday's headlines.
Wir von der europäischen Seite müssen bei unseren Zusagen schneller werden. Einiges ist in Gang gekommen, das muss man sagen.
On continue. Nous n'avons pas peur de la prison. La prison est faite pour pas pour les chiens.
S'il n'a pas peur des votes, il n'a qu'à reprendre les élections, soit il démissionne. C'est l'un ou l'autre.
Vincent McCory, inviting you to the new look Africa 54, premiering soon. Same great team, but with new energy and a new host, Esther Gidui-Ewart.
Hi, and welcome. We'll bring you a closer look at politics, technology, health, and so much more, backed by VOA correspondents across Africa and the world, including perspectives from Washington, D.C. and Africans achieving abroad.
Same time, same channels.
Stay tuned.
Well, it's time for our health report, and joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Madu with a bit of positive news. Lino.
That's right, Vincent. Some positive news. A new study suggests children today are more likely to survive to early adulthood than they were in years past. Researchers examined data collected from 195 countries and territories between 1990 and 2017, during which time the annual number of fatalities among youth under age 20 dropped by 52% from about 13.8 million to just 6.6 million. Worldwide reductions in mortality rates were most rapid in children between the 1 and 4, driven by declines in death from diarrhea, lower respiratory infection, and other common infectious diseases. The largest declines were seen in Western, Eastern, and Sub-Saharan Africa, according to a researcher's report in the Journal of the American Medical Association Pediatrics. However, the burden of childhood disability increased. Researchers analyzed the impact of health on children's lives using a measure known as disability-adjusted life years, which reflects the gap between children's current health status and an ideal situation where kids are all free of disease and disability. During the study, aggregate childhood disability increased 4.7% to a total of 147 million years lived with disability. Melinda Gates is co-founder of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, established in 2000, with the mission to help all people lead healthy, productive lives. In an interview with Melinda Gates, we discussed her newly released book, Moments of Lift, How Empowering Women Change the World. Among other things, she elaborates on her tireless efforts over the years to empower women and girls around the world and the importance of family planning, as well as the work of the Gates Foundation. Melinda Gates, thank you so much for joining us on The Voice of America.
Thanks for having me.
You just released a book, The Moment of Lift. So why did you think of this title, The Moment of Lift? What is the Moment of Lift?
Well, when I was a little girl, my dad was an Apollo engineer, and he worked on that first mission that went up to space. And my sister and I would get to be in our jammies late at night watching that rocket take off. And I love that moment when the engines were ignited and the Earth was shaking and rumbling, and that rocket would lift off against the forces of gravity that pushed it down and head off to the moon. And I thought about women, and I have thought about all the barriers that hold us down in various societies. And if we could remove those barriers, we would get this moment of lift for women and men all over the world.
And let's talk about some of those barriers. You've traveled around the world working in empowering women and girls. What are some of the commonalities you were able to see, to witness?
Well, I see so many women that if we allow them as a world to have access to contraceptives, what we know from society after society around the world is once a woman has access to contraceptives, she can time and space the births of her children, she can continue her education, she can work in the workforce if she chooses. Her kids are healthier, she's healthier, the family's wealthier and better educated. So that barrier, every society has to make the transition through contraceptives first. If women have access to contraceptives and their kids and they have good health, the next barrier you have to remove is education. Because when women are educated, it changes absolutely everything in their family and even the decisions they make and what they go do in the world.
The work of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has impacted the world, and particularly you have worked on the continent of Africa. More than $15 billion have been invested in projects related to Africa. Would you tell us about the impact that you were able to see that has really transformed people's lives?
Yes, so the foundation has been in existence now for over 20 years. I think the most important thing for everybody to know is we work in partnership. There is nothing the foundation has ever done without being in full partnership with others, and particularly with governments and citizens on the ground in various countries. And philanthropy is just, all it can be is this catalytic wedge. We can try things, we can experiment, where you wouldn't want a government to do that with taxpayer money, but if we can prove things out and measure it, then we can ask government to scale it up. And so I think one of the foundation's biggest successes has been in vaccinations. Why is childhood death down, cut in half since 1990? Two enormous reasons: vaccinations and malarial bed nets. And we're part of two large-scale partnerships that we have worked on to scale up vaccines in many countries in Africa and all over the world, and to make sure that malaria bed nets through the Global Fund are distributed to women who sleep under them and keep their kids under them, and it keeps them alive.
So speaking of vaccinations, vaccines have helped the world rid certain diseases like smallpox. Today we see a resurgence of measles. And one of the reasons is because some parents in the United States refuse to vaccinate their children. How does it make you feel?
When I hear that there are cases of measles in the United States, I'm incredibly frustrated. And I'm saddened to think that a global health issue that we had solved in the United States has come back because parents have believed misinformation. And, no child should have measles in this country. No person who is in an immune-compromised situation in the United States should be affected by someone else because a parent has chosen not to get the measles vaccine. These are life-saving tools. Women tell me all over Africa they walk 10 miles in the heat to get vaccines because it saves their children's lives. So I'm saddened to see this in the United States, and I hope it makes people realize how lucky we are to have vaccines in our country.
So to go back to family planning, why is it so important? What is the message behind family planning?
Family planning is the greatest anti-poverty tool we have in the world. When a woman can time and space the births of her children, her family is healthier, her entire family. The kids are better educated and the family is wealthier.
How does empowering women change the world? What is the takeaway from the book?
If you empower women, they empower everybody else around them. And so if we want healthy societies, we lift up all women. And the goal is not just equality, the goal is a better human race with more connection. And that's the message of the book.
Melinda Gates, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
It was great to have you. And in her book, The Moment of Lift, Melinda Gates also shares some of her personal stories, including the abuse she once experienced in her past. She says many women around the world are in relationships where they are being abused, and she hopes her experience can be an encouragement to some. And that's our health report for today. To stay in touch, find me on Twitter @LenorModou. Vincent, back to you.
A very, very insightful interview. Thank you very much, Lenore. Now be sure to watch Lenore Modou's health reports every Tuesday and Thursday right here on Africa 54. And here's what's trending. It's being called Uber for organs. A kidney needed for transplanting has been delivered by a drone for the first time ever. This according to the University of Maryland Medical Center. The new development could herald faster, safer, and more cost-efficient organ transport. The specially designed high-tech drone was fitted with equipment to monitor the kidney along its 5-kilometer journey to its recipient. Current transport methods involve extensive chartered flights or even variable commercial flights, occasionally resulting in delays. The cost is typically around $5,000. Well, next up, this lush, picture-perfect garden is on display near the centre of Melbourne, Australia. This garden and those around it are cultivated to thrive in local conditions. It's designed to save about 16,000 litres of water per year. The necessity to save every drop is ever pressing. Melbourne's reservoirs are only 50% full, with the coming months expected to be drier than average. Recycled materials here, like the concrete and steel, only adding to green credentials. Last year was Australia's third warmest on record, and demand is growing for environmentally sustainable gardens. Well, and finally, academics in the U.S. are developing an inflatable robot they say could one day be used in space and in our homes. Brigham Young University in the western state of Utah created the robot, which they call King Louie. It's made of fabric, and its interior is similar to that of a bicycle tire. The school says the benefits of making a robot inflatable are that they cannot hurt people. They are light and can be deflated to make them easily transportable. It's also cheaper to produce than a traditional robot. BYU says inflatable robots could be used to reach difficult areas in search and rescue efforts, to help old or disabled people, or to even service satellites in space. And that's what's trending, and that's our show. Have a good night. Lady!